Hello, Fantasy Football Nation, and welcome to the Week 10 preview edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report for your team, your league, your game. This is your home. You know where it's at to find advice for your team for a winning week. Chris Pearson here as always, and happy Color Rush Day. Yeah, some people might look at this and think he's getting the Christmas spirit just a little bit too early. Actually, not really, because tonight for Thursday Night Football, the Bills and the Jets are going to go in color rush mode, meaning they're going to go all red and all green. So you're going to have a lot of color on the television tonight. So don't adjust your set, don't adjust your color settings. That's what they're wearing tonight. So I'm definitely getting in the mood here for the Thursday night game tonight and for Week 10. So I'm decked out in my color. I got coloring down below here. I got code red. So I'm definitely on the red and green for the Bills and Jets tonight. So cheers to Week 10. So let's try and get you a win this week. As for me, I'm coming off my best week of the season. I mean, last week I was ecstatic. I pulled off a big upset last week against the only undefeated team in my league. They went down hard, like by 51 points. I had 137 points total, thanks to the combined efforts of three guys that actually I have acquired off waivers at some point this season. I'm talking about Derek Carr of Oakland at quarterback, running back D'Angelo Williams, who's been a great fill-in for Le'Veon Bell in Pittsburgh, and Tyler Eifert, the Bengals tight end, who's emerged into a stud this year. So they combined for the vast majority of my points. So even though I'm still sitting at 3-6, if I can keep this momentum going, there's still hope that I can win the division and still get to the postseason. You never want to give up on your season. I've said it before on here and I'll say it again. You never want to give up on the year. There's always a chance you can turn things around, and as I showed last week, you can knock off an undefeated team in your league. So there's still a chance. Even though this season has been a very wild one in the fact that we have lost a lot of players for the season due to injuries. The bye weeks have been hard the past couple weeks, I'm sure, on a lot of fantasy rosters. But trust me, there are guys out there that can impact your lineup, make dents on your roster, and that will come through for you on a weekly basis, even in these tough weeks. So just keep that in mind as the season goes on. The big story from last week, and I don't know if you guys saw it yesterday, we had another running back injury that was lost for the season last week, and this time it's out of New England. That's Dion Lewis. Now, Dion has been pretty much from week one, he was the main benefactor of the running game there in New England, but now he is out for the year with a torn ACL. So he's been lost for the year, joining likes of Le'Veon Bell, Arian Foster, Jamal Charles. The list goes on and on of running backs that we have lost for the year. We've lost some wide receivers for the year. We've lost some quarterbacks at different times this season. It's been a very trying year on the injury front this year. But now that could mean a couple things. Obviously, LeGarrette Blount is going to get a lot more work in New England's offense. He now is going to be the main ground and pound guy at quarterback for you, running back for you on the ground. It'd be nice if he was quarterback, but that's Tom Brady's job. He's got that pretty much well in hand. And also, we could see more work for James White out of Oklahoma. The Patriots, I think, really, when they drafted him, seemed to like him, and now he's going to get, I think, a lot of the passing down work going forward. So he could be used if you're hurting at running back in a pinch, maybe as a flex position, even maybe as an RB3 to see what happens with that in the meantime. So then Brandon Bolden might also get some work there as well. So you might not want to throw one of those guys in there right away until we see the timeshare split between those two at work. But definitely LeGarrette Blount now is a serious RB1 going forward for the rest of the season because he's still going to get the majority of the work in the Patriots backfield with Lewis out. The other big story is at quarterback, and that's in Indianapolis with Andrew Luck. For the longest time, we thought that Andrew Luck was playing hurt, and there was. And for a couple weeks, he missed time with the shoulder issue. Then there was the whole thing about, well, did he have fractured ribs or not? Was something actually wrong? Well, then he actually took a legitimate shot in the fourth quarter of the Denver game last week, and then it was revealed that Luck has a lacerated kidney and a torn abdominal muscle, and now he is out. He is officially declared out for 2 to 6 weeks, probably on the further end of that spectrum than 2 weeks, because as we saw in San Diego, a lacerated kidney is what also took Keenan Allen out for the season. So that's probably more on the 6-week timetable than it is the 2-week time frame. So you're going to see a lot of Matt Hasselbeck at quarterback in Indianapolis for these next several weeks. Now, it is noted that Hasselbeck did do very well in his couple starts when Luck was out. In fact, he won both games, but they were in very kind of easy matchups against the AFC South, and the Colts always seem to beat the AFC South. So take that with a grain of salt as you're seeing Hasselbeck over these next few weeks, because the matchups, you know, some are going to be easy, some aren't. So, but I could potentially see Hasselbeck being used as maybe a low-end QB2 right now for the time being, because here's the thing I like about Hasselbeck, and I'm sure it's been broken down several times on different football shows. Matt Hasselbeck has a tendency to release the ball much quicker than Andrew Luck does in the pocket. Hasselbeck usually gets it out there in like 1 to 2 seconds. Luck has a tendency to hold it for like 6 seconds or more, and then the pressure gets to him. So I always like that about Matt Hasselbeck. For a 40-year-old quarterback, he is definitely one of the better backups in the league, if not the best. So I certainly like his upside going forward, but for now, more of a low-end QB2 until we really can see what he does in tougher matchups. So I wouldn't trust him yet as a starter for sure. Maybe more of a desperate bye-week filler option if you don't have an option this week. Now, the Colts are on bye this week, so you can't use him this week. But maybe going forward, just take a look at his schedule, see what he has there, and maybe if you take a shot on him, if you're hurting at quarterback and need a bye-week filler option or a QB2 or 3 in deeper leagues, I think you take a flyer on Matt Hasselbeck and see what happens for you. So, so we look at these at this Week 10 going forward here. So there are 4 teams on bye this week, and really there's a few obviously that are impacted from this, but one really isn't. The Colts are on bye, San Diego is on bye, and even though the Chargers are record-wise a terrible team, there's still plenty of weapons there in San Diego that you'll miss this week. And Atlanta is on a bye. Now, San Francisco is also on a bye, but obviously no 49ers right now are really recommended plays in fantasy because the team, A, is really terrible, and B, there's injuries in the running back front. The wide receivers are inconsistent, and of course, Colin Kaepernick just got benched for Blaine Gabbert. So there's really no one reliable in San Francisco. So you're really not going to miss anything with the 49ers this week. But the big names you're going to miss, obviously, at quarterback you're going to miss, Hasselbeck or Luck. You're going to be without Luck for 2 to 6 weeks, but you're not going to have Hasselbeck this week to play. You're missing Phillip Rivers, who has actually been, in terms of the passing yardage per game, San Diego, you'll be surprised to know, is the #1 passing offense in the NFL. So you're not going to have Phillip Rivers this week or Matt Ryan. At running back, you're missing Frank Gore, who actually has done a nice job in Indianapolis. You're missing Danny Woodhead, Melvin Gordon, and Devontae Freeman this week, who's done a great job in Atlanta. Wide receivers, you're missing T.Y. Hilton, Dante Moncrief, and Julio Jones. And at tight end, you're missing Dwayne Allen, Kobe Fleener, and Antonio Gates this week. So a couple big names that you're missing. You've got to find some guys to fill in those spots, or if you've got depth in those positions to fill in. We're going to take a look at these matchups and see what you can exploit this week. I want to preface it by saying there are 2 games this week, not just 1, but 2 that I really like this week as fantasy games of the week. And I called it last week. I said on this very show that Oakland against Pittsburgh would be the fantasy point producer of the week. And that game was an offensive shootout. Down to the very end, Pittsburgh won 38-35. And Derek Carr had a big day. D'Angelo Williams had a big day. Big Ben before he got hurt again. Antonio Brown. There were big things in that game. So I know when I see them. Just keep that in mind. But there are 2 games we got like. But let's start, of course, with tonight's game, with the Thursday night matchup between Buffalo and the Jets. This game for me, I don't really like a whole lot of guys, and I tweeted it out yesterday. I don't really like a whole lot of these guys as really must-start options. Maybe, again, if you're hurting at these positions or need a bye-week filler. For example, the quarterbacks, I think both Tyrod Taylor and Ryan Fitzpatrick this week are both kind of low-end QB2s. I think, this is going to be a very low-scoring defensive game. I don't really see a lot, a big day from either quarterback. If I had to pick one out of the two, I would prefer Tyrod Taylor because he's got that running ability that Fitzpatrick really lacks. Fitzpatrick is more of a downfield thrower, and he lets Chris Ivory do the work on the ground. Tyrod Taylor, while he has LaShawn McCoy in the backfield and or Carlos Williams, he still has the running ability to make plays. So, and he's fully healthy from the knee issue now. So, but again, based on how tough this matchup is, I really only prefer these guys as low-end QB2s, maybe a bye-week filler. Again, I would prefer Taylor to Fitzpatrick based, again, on value alone, on skill set alone. But I can't really recommend either guy as a must-start option this week because, again, these are two really, really good defenses. And I think it's going to be a very low-scoring, grind-it-out game. As for the running backs, again, out of this bunch, if I had to pick one, again, I would probably lean toward, again, LaShawn McCoy if he's a full go. He says he's going to play through a shoulder issue that he's dealing with this week. He's a little bit banged up, and usually McCoy is. But for me, more of a low-end RB2. Now, I wouldn't mind playing Carlos Williams as more like a flex option or an RB3 because here's the thing about Carlos Williams. He's fully recovered from the concussion, so he's back to full health. And really, when McCoy actually played, Carlos Williams has actually been able to find the end zone at least a couple of times this season during those games. And we even saw with McCoy out, Williams was a great fill-in in the times that McCoy was actually out. So they're both very good options. But for me, McCoy more of a low-end RB2. Carlos Williams, for me, more of a RB3 or a flex if you're really hurting at that position. And for Chris Ivory, again, more of a low-end RB2 again. If you don't have any better options, you can put in Chris Ivory in there and see what he can do. But again, this is a tough matchup with that Bills defensive front. He will play from what I've read, even though he's dealing with kind of a nagging hamstring issue. He's listed as probable, so he's probably good to go. So you can put him in your lineup if you don't have better options at running back. But just be aware, just temper your expectations a little bit because of the tough matchup. The wide receivers this week, I still really like the Jets guys. From what I've read, Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker are both expected to play this week through their issues again. Marshall, of course, dealing with the ankle and toe issues. Decker dealing with the knee, but they're both expected to play again this week. Marshall, for me, more of a high-end wide receiver 2. Decker, a low-end wide receiver 2 or 3. So, again, they might end up finding the end zone. It's hard to tell which one's going to get there, but again, you probably don't have better options at wide receiver this week. If you don't, then you got to put them in there. But just be aware they might not have big days this week based on the matchup. And for the Bills, Sammy Watkins, there was a lot of question marks last week about his availability at wide receiver. He was dealing with the ankle issue. He was actually reported as questionable, and I honestly thought last week that he was not going to play. So at the last minute, I made a move. I picked up Robert Woods instead of Sammy Watkins. Well, turns out that was kind of, even though it thankfully didn't affect the outcome of my week, but it was kind of a big mistake because Sammy Watkins goes off for 22 fantasy points and Robert Woods puts up a big giant donut. So I reversed course this week. I got Sammy Watkins back. I dropped Robert Woods. So, and now, but here's the thing. I'm not going to start Sammy Watkins this week because this is, again, a tough matchup. Darrelle Revis will likely be shadowing Sammy Watkins all night. So it's a very tough matchup to ask for. Although Allen Robinson, actually, of Jacksonville, did do a decent job against Revis last week. So it gives a little bit of hope for Sammy Watkins owners. But, again, I just find that it's going to be a little bit tougher. I really can't recommend him as anything more than a kind of a high-end wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. But, again, it's just a lot to ask for. It's a very tough matchup this week. So maybe, if you're worried about Watkins being shadowed, then maybe you take a shot on Robert Woods and see what he's going to do. But I really can't recommend him going forward as a strong fantasy option. Maybe just a one-off for this week because of the tough matchup, but as a desperate wide receiver 3 or 4. But I really can't recommend him as a strong play this week because, again, it's just asking a lot of him. He's just so inconsistent, and Tyrod Taylor clearly prefers Sammy Watkins as his main weapon in Buffalo. So, and occasionally Charles Clay is his tight end, but he's also been getting lesser targets. And that's why I don't really like Clay this week, but maybe more of a high-end tight end 2. He is, starting now that Taylor's back, he is starting to get a little bit more work in that, but I'm not thrilled by his prospects. So for me, there's, again, not a lot of must-start guys, but if you had to pick, I would prefer Taylor, Chidi McCoy barely over Ivory. I like Marshall and Decker a lot more than I do Watkins and Charles Clay at tight end. So that's who I like for that matchup. All right, going into the Sunday games here, starting off with the 1 o'clock games, let's talk about Detroit at Green Bay. I think it's obvious when I say to start your Packers this week because, as we know, the Lions, they're cleaning house. They're 1-7. They're pretty bad. Even though the owner has said the coaching staff is mostly safe, they've already gotten rid of their president, their GM. They're really kind of trying to clean things up there. There have also been reports, and this is interesting, there have also been reports that Matthew Stafford could be available to teams beginning next season. And I've read online that the Browns, the Texans, the 49ers, and the Jets could all be interested in Stafford's services. And I think any one of those four would fit because all four of those teams are going through really bad quarterback situations. Of course, the Browns, you've got a banged-up Josh McCown and Johnny Manziel. You don't know what you're going to get out of him. The Texans, your starter is Brian Hoyer. I mean, that's pretty much what you have to say about that. And you've had to release a quarterback in Ryan Mallett. The 49ers, you just benched Colin Kaepernick for Blaine Gabbert. Enough said there. Jets, your starter's Ryan Fitzpatrick, and your backup's Geno Smith, who either gets punched in the jaw or is banged up. So, I mean, any one of those situations, Matthew Stafford would be a huge upgrade in. I don't know why Detroit would get rid of him. He's not the only one to blame for their 1-7 start, mind you, but it just stunned me that Detroit would get rid of him. But for this matchup, love the Packers this week. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers and Randall Cobb are your must-start guys. And I would probably even say, I would lean James Starks as a must-start. And he has become now according to Mike McCarthy, he is the #1 option in Green Bay. But that comes with a caveat because McCarthy said we're still going to use a 1-2 punch approach. And that's what we hate in fantasy football, that committee approach. We can't stand that when teams do that. But I have to say, though, Starks is the higher upside play because Eddie Lacy has just been a huge fantasy disappointment this season for owners who trusted him with a first-round draft pick. He has been a major disappointment. And so Starks, for me, is at least a low-end safe RB1 because of this great matchup. He's the hot hand. You want to ride the hot hand in fantasy, so go with him. But as for Lacy, he's just too tough to be trusted. I don't think you can really trust him as nothing more maybe than a desperate RB3 or a flex, hoping he gets out there and gets some touches. If McCarthy says it's a 1-2, then they're obviously going to use him in some capacity, but they're obviously not going to use him as much as Starks. So you might throw him out there as a desperate play, as a flex, and see what happens. But obviously Starks has the higher upside there. As for the other receivers, behind Randall Cobb, James Jones was kind of a bust last week. He really got outplayed by Devontae Adams, who seems to be fully cleared and healthy from the ankle injury that he had. So for me, Jones is still a touchdown scorer. He can still make plays. He's still a target of Aaron Rodgers. But with that in mind, he's kind of more of a boomer bust wide receiver 2 or 3. But this matchup is a great one to exploit. And I also like Devontae Adams, kind of a high-end wide receiver 3. Let's see, though, if that 1-week resurgence is more of a trend going forward and not a fluke for Devontae Adams. Because obviously we know now he's going to get targeted in this offense, and he is, a good target of Aaron Rodgers. But let's see if that trend continues moving forward before we really trust him in our lineup. So James Jones, I still have him ranked a little bit higher, wide receiver 2 or 3. Devontae Adams is kind of more of a high-end wide receiver 3 until we see the consistency moving forward. For the Lions, obviously the only safe play is Calvin Johnson. Now, and all signs are him going to be playing this week. It looks like he's healthy. He did have the ankle injury the week before the bye. He kind of re-injured it last week, but it looks like he's going to be listed as probable to go this week. So as long as that injury shows no signs of slowing him down, you throw out Megatron there as his usual low-end wide receiver 1 self. Stafford this week for me is more of a low-end QB2, QB3. Green Bay plays well at home. The defense is always strong. And you just fear that Stafford's going to be pressured into making a lot more mistakes because he has been very turnover-prone with the interceptions this year. So for me, kind of a risky QB2 play, maybe more toward the QB3 side of things. Very, very risky for this matchup. You really can't play any line at running back at this point. It seems kind of odd now that some people are saying now that Joik Bell, who has been banged up most of the year, is now the best back out of this bunch. But that's what happens when you don't give Amir Abdullah touches. You put him, and Amir Abdullah ends up in the doghouse because he's fumbling all the time. And oh, by the way, your other good player, Theo Riddick, is just an occasional pass catcher. And really, there's no one that stands out as a consistent number one option. That's the bad thing about running back committees. When no running back steps up and stands out, that's the problem. It's happening now in Detroit. It's happening in Washington. It was happening in Tennessee until Antonio Andrews emerged from the bunch. So that's the frustrating thing. So we really can't trust a Detroit running back until one really emerges from the group. And I would not trust Joik Bell right now in fantasy leagues. I wouldn't right now. Golden Tate has just been a huge disappointment this year for fantasy owners. He really only has fantasy relevance if Megatron is covered or if he doesn't play. He's been very much a bust this season. He's really not even a wide receiver 3. And Eric Ebron at tight end, kind of more of a low-end tight end 2. He is starting to get targeted a little more frequently, but not really majorly enough to be a consistent fantasy option. So for me, more of a low-end tight end 2 this week and for the foreseeable future. Dallas at Tampa Bay. I got to say, you got to like a lot of the Buccaneers this week because Dallas has been very forgiving defensively these past few weeks. Obviously, with Matt Castle at quarterback, the offense is struggling. 6 straight losses now for the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys need Tony Romo back in the worst way, and they need Dez Bryant to be fully healthy because he had a setback in that last game. He kind of landed awkwardly and had some issues with that foot. All signs are to him pointing to him playing again this week, so that's a good sign. But Dallas needs Tony Romo back in the worst way. So I really like Tampa Bay. And obviously out of Tampa Bay, the start of the week is Jameis Winston. And I never thought that I would say that, but for the first time, I think he's much a low-end QB1 and a really great bye-week filler. Jameis is going to find ways to attack that weak secondary of Dallas. He's got a great weapon in Mike Evans, who I think also is a must-start this week at wide receiver. You know, he's going to get a lot of targets because Vincent Jackson likely is still going to be out with that knee issue. So, and Severian Jenkins isn't back yet at tight end. So they're both great options. I think they're both must-start guys. And if you're hurting at quarterback again and you don't have Phillip Rivers or you don't have Matt Ryan, then you can pick up Jameis Winston off waivers if he's still out there and put him in your lineup and reap the benefits, because I think he's going to have an actual big week this week, and he's cut back on the turnovers. So he is really starting to develop into a decent real-life player, and I think he'll be a good fantasy option for you this week. So, because again, that Dallas defense has just been it's banged up all year. It's been forgiving. Philly carved him up last week. He's going to be a good option. So for me, Jameis Winston, Mike Evans, must-start options for Tampa Bay. I think Doug Martin, again, is a must-start. I really, really like him as a high-end RB2. Doug Martin has looked so solid these past couple weeks. I think he's kind of looking back as how he was as a rookie when he really broke out. So I really like Doug Martin. I think he is a definite must-start option. As for the other guys, Charles Sims, behind him, Sims is kind of really hit or miss. He's really nothing more than an RB3 or a flex play because his upside is very, very capped by game flow, by situations, how he's used in the running game or the passing game. So I'm really not thrilled with Charles Sims this week. Again, more of an RB3 or flex. And Vincent Jackson, didn't practice again on Wednesday, so that really kind of clouds his status for this week. If he goes, he's a very, very risky wide receiver 2 or 3 play, but be prepared, though, to be without him because it's really, really looking like that knee is giving him a lot of issues. So obviously that means more targets for Mike Evans. He's really the only healthy option the Bucs have right now. I have Mike Evans in my league, so I'm really reaping the benefits of that. So yeah, just be prepared if you held on to Vincent Jackson, you still have room for him on your bench. Just be prepared to be without him again this week. The only Cowboys I can really recommend are Darren McFadden and Dez Bryant. That's really the only two I can recommend. Darren McFadden, look, he has done a nice job in running back. He's really been Dallas's MVP during the time Tony Romo's been out, because he's getting the bulk of the work. As I said, they got rid of Joseph Randle, so really he's now the only option really at running back the Cowboys have. So, and Tampa's defense also has been very forgiving this year. They're not flashy, they're not great. So this is actually a decent matchup for McFadden to exploit. I really like him this week. High-end RB2, but serious RB1 upside, and a great flex play this week if you have Darren McFadden as a flex spot. I think you can put him in there and really get some good numbers from Darren McFadden this week as well. And I mentioned Dez Bryant. Here's the thing, though, about Dez. Until Romo comes back in Week 11, which he will come back next week, he'll be off the injured reserve list or the IR designated return list, so he'll be available for Week 11. Until he comes back, Matt Castle is really holding Dez Bryant back. But Bryant is still usable as a kind of a low-end wide receiver 2 until Romo comes back. Once Romo comes back, he'll be his normal wide receiver 1 status. But for now, you really can't trust him with anything more than that. Now, Terrence Williams, I can't really recommend him even as a wide receiver 3, because he has really been disappointing in Romo's absence. So I can't recommend him for this matchup either. And obviously, I'm not going to recommend you play Matt Castle, because he's just been a major disappointment. Come on, the guy's even won 1 start in Romo's absence. So, not even an A-plus matchup could you pay me enough to start Matt Castle in fantasy. So, no, I would not do it. So, again, for that matchup, Darren McFadden, Dez Bryant, there are 2 Cowboys you're playing. Bucks, play Jameis Winston, Doug Martin, Mike Evans. Those 3 for sure. You should get major points from those guys. Carolina at Tennessee. You are starting your Panthers this week. I mean, again, this is another great matchup for Carolina to exploit. Carolina will likely remain undefeated. They'll probably win this game. Although I got to admit, Tennessee did look good last week, but they were playing the Saints. The Saints defense has been abysmal this season, so Marcus Mariota can look really good against them. But Carolina's defense is clearly on a different level than New Orleans. Even though it's at Tennessee, it's going to be a tough matchup for Mariota to exploit. But the Panthers, they're going to feast on that defense, as I'm in Thanksgiving yet. They're going to get an early Thanksgiving meal because they are just going to destroy Tennessee. Cam Newton obviously is a must start. Greg Olsen at tight end is a must start. And I'm going to say it, Jonathan Stewart for me is a must start this week. I picked up Jonathan Stewart a couple weeks ago. I've been very impressed with how well Jonathan Stewart has done. He has had double-digit fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 weeks. He scored 3 touchdowns over that time frame, and this week should be no different. Now, he did have kind of a downer week last week because the Packers, tough defense, they were clearly focused on eliminating Jonathan Stewart, but I think this week is going to be a great week for Jonathan Stewart. I love him. High-end RB2 with serious upside this week. I really like him in this matchup. Now, he has been limited in practice the past couple days by an ankle issue, but all signs are to him still pointing to play. So I'm a Jonathan Stewart owner. I'm going to be monitoring that. Probably see if he practices tomorrow. But as far as I know, all signs are to him playing this week. And if he goes, I love the matchup, and I think he's definitely a strong starting option. And even a wide receiver between Ted Ginn and Corey Brown, I think both of these guys are usable kind of as what the heck wide receiver 3s. If you're hurting at wide receiver, if you don't have, say, a T.Y. Hilton or something like that, or Julio Jones, and you have these guys on your bench and you're stashing them away, I think either of them are really decent plays this week. I think either one can potentially find the end zone. They've kind of been pretty even in targets lately, and I think and Greg Olsen can't catch everything, so one of those guys is going to emerge as a decent option this week. I like both guys. If you're hurting at wide receiver, plug them in as wide receiver 3s, see what happens. So I like a lot of the Panthers this week, I'm just going to say. But for the Titans, I really can't recommend anybody as starters because, again, the Panthers' defense so strong. Mariota, for me, is more of a QB3 or a very desperate bye-week filler in like deep leagues. If you're really hurting, but you're not going to see a big week, and you're not going to see a repeat week of last week, I think, this week out of Marcus Mariota, unless he gets garbage time stats. That's really the only hope he has for a good week, is he puts up garbage time numbers if this game gets out of hand. Because, I don't think Tennessee's going to win this game, and the Panthers' defense is just so strong. So I don't recommend him there. Antonio Andrews at running back, not against this defense. Really, again, more of a desperate RB3 or a flex play. I don't really like him. Now, they did reactivate David Cobb from IR, and we'll see what role he's going to play moving forward, if anything. But for now, with Mike Mularkey said Antonio Andrews is the guy. He's the workhorse back right now. But we'll see if that has any effect on Antonio Andrews going forward. But this matchup, I don't like him. Can't trust anybody at wide receiver right now. Kendall Wright's banged up. Until we see more out of Dorial Green-Beckham, I don't think you can really trust him yet as a wide receiver 3 until we see more consistency. Yes, the targets were nice last week, getting those targets in the Saints game, but is that going to be a trend moving forward? So I wouldn't really put risk on that yet until we see an actual real breakout performance from Dorial Green-Beckham this week. So more of a low end 3, high end 4 until we see more from him going forward. And Delaney Walker, well, he had another nice game last week. He's just a very, very risky tight end 2 for me this week, again, with a tough matchup. So, love the Panthers, hate the Titans. That's just how I see that this week in this matchup. To me, very, very one-sided. Chicago is at St. Louis. The big story out of Chicago, Matt Forte has actually been listed as limited in practice. Now, we all thought that he would be out for at least a couple weeks with this knee issue, and that Jeremy Langford, who looked amazing last week, by the way, would fill in and take the role for himself. And he had 19 fantasy points in a CBS league last week. So we thought for sure that he would still be the guy in Chicago this week. But this is something to monitor. This is something to really check going forward to see if Forte is going to go or not. To me, I think he's not going to play. I think he's going to be out. I think Langford will still have the role this week. But just keep an eye on that going forward. As for guys you're playing in this matchup, for the Bears, this is a very tough matchup for Chicago because that Rams defense is very strong. It's a strong defensive front. But, I think the safest play is Alshon Jeffrey. Again, he's healthy. He's the top weapon for Jay Cutler. Just temporary expectations. But for me, still kind of a low-end wide receiver 1. I think he can still be usable and startable in this matchup. Cutler, for me, is more of a low-end QB 2. I think, if you have no better options at quarterback out there on waivers or on your bench or anything, if you have to play Cutler, he's not a bad option. But I think this is the week where the streak ends. Cutler has had 5 straight weeks of 21 fantasy points exactly in a CBS league. But I think this is the week where it ends because the Rams are just so strong. I highly doubt he gets that again this week. So for me, it's just more of a low-end QB2. Again, I really like Jeremy Langford. I don't think Forte is going to play. So, again, for me, more of a low-end RB2. And the nice thing is Langford has more fantasy value because he gets work in the passing game as well. So that's where also he can thrive in this offense also. So, for me, more of a low-end RB2. And Martellus Bennett, more of a low-end tight end 1 or 2 for this matchup. Still getting targets from Jay Cutler. But, outside of Alshon Jeffrey and Eddie Royal's out. So Bennett kind of becomes the second option there in Chicago. So I like a lot of the Bears this week, but mainly I think Langford is a really safe play. Jeffrey's a safe play. Cutler only if you're really desperate at quarterback. So that's the way I see the Bears situation. As for the Rams, I think the 2 guys you can really trust are Todd Gurley and Tavon Austin. Todd Gurley obviously is an obvious must start. Obviously, continuing to be strong. Chicago's defense has been forgiving this year. You got to play Todd Gurley. And Tavon Austin actually, outside of Gurley, he's the best weapon the Rams have. So he's clearly the main guy at wide receiver. He also occasionally does reverses where he runs the ball. So he is kind of a dual threat weapon. So if you are hurting at this position and he's somehow still out there on your waiver wire, pick him up. I think you can use him as at least a wide receiver 3 for you because wide receivers do get fantasy points for rushing yards. So it benefits your team. So go out there, pick him up, see what he can do for you in that wide receiver 3 spot. Now, the Rams also made an interesting signing this week. They picked up Wes Welker. And as you guys probably are aware, Welker's been out of the league a couple times because of the concussion issue. From what I've heard from his doctors. He's been cleared. He's good to go. Now, I don't know what kind of role he'll have with the Rams going forward. Will he become a focal point of the offense? That time will tell. So I really wouldn't go out there and rush to pick up Wes Welker just yet until we see what kind of role he has with this offense. So just keep your, maybe someone you put on your scout team to see what happens. But clearly when he's been healthy and active, he's been a good weapon for a lot of teams, especially this time in Denver. So he's clearly was a big target in New England. So clearly, the upside is there. So, but just keep that in mind. Someone to watch on your scout team moving forward. As for Nick Foles at quarterback, starting to warm him a little bit, because he makes plays to Austin. He's trying to do really a lot with what little options he has. But he's got a plus matchup here with Chicago. I think he can actually be usable. Maybe he's kind of a low-end QB2 or even a desperate bye-week filler. Not one of the best bye-week filler options out there, but certainly someone that's usable in a pinch. So for me, for the Rams, Gurley and Austin, I think you're putting those guys in a safe place for you. And Foles, more of a desperate bye-week filler option if there are no better ones out there on your wire that are available. All right, here's one of my fantasy games of the week. Here, and this is probably more 1B. My 1A is coming later, but this is my 1B. I'm talking about New Orleans at Washington. And you might think I'm nuts on that one, but here's the thing. The Saints have been involved in some crazy high-scoring games this year. There was the Buku scoring fest with the Giants. There was the game against Tennessee last week where the Saints defense made Marcus Mariota look like a stud in his rookie year. Both these defenses are just really, really forgiving. They're both really bad. I mean, that's the thing. So I think you could get – so in terms of the quarterbacks, Drew Brees and, yes, Kirk Cousins are must-start quarterbacks this week. I mean, Kirk Cousins, if you are hurting at quarterback, you pick up Kirk Cousins and you start him this week. I mean, the Saints, it's ironic. Drew Brees, okay? Drew Brees played at Purdue, okay? He played at Purdue. It's my alma mater. It's my school. He played at Purdue. The Saints are basically Purdue with the offense, okay? This year's Purdue with the offense because the defense cannot stop anybody or anything, okay? That's just what it is. So if the Saints, for gosh sake, if they can make Marcus Mariota look like a star, imagine how they're going to make Kirk Cousins look this week. Actually, pretty capable quarterback that can make plays and can make throws to his receivers. And oh, by the way, Kirk Cousins gets Deshaun Jackson back this week, which is a scary thought. So I think he is a low-end QB1. He's the bye-week filler of the week. If he is out there and you are hurting at quarterback, if you don't have a top-tier quarterback because on bye this week, or your quarterback's injured, or you lost Big Ben, get Kirk Cousins. Pick him up if he's still out there. I think he will have a big, big week this week. So I think, it's a gimme. The Saints for me this week in this matchup are gimmies because, again, Washington is terrible on defense. So you play Drew Brees, you play Mark Ingram, you play Brandon Cooks and Willie Snead, who are the top two receiving options there in New Orleans. I like both Cooks and Snead as strong wide receiver twos. And Marcus Colston, he occasionally gets his share of targets, but he has been leapfrogged in the receiver order. He is more, for me, of a desperate wide receiver 3. So play him if you want. Play him if you risk, but, just be aware that he doesn't really get a whole lot of work. So for me, though, the 4 safe bets, Brees, Ingram, Cooks, and Snead. Those 4 are really safe bets this week. And for Washington, you play Kirk Cousins if you're hurting at quarterback. You play Deshaun Jackson. Now that he's back healthy, you couldn't ask for a better matchup. For me, a high-end wide receiver 2 with upside for Deshaun Jackson. You play Jordan Reed at tight end as a low-end tight end 1 or another bye-week filler at tight end if you don't have Antonio Gates this week or you don't have, Dwayne Allen or Kobe Fleener. You put in Jordan Reed if he's out there on waivers as a great option for you this week. He can find his share of targets, could find the end zone. So I like Jordan Reed moving forward. And Pierre Garçon and Jamison Crowder, even though their targets now are going to be scaled back a bit because Deshaun Jackson is back healthy, I still like either guys, maybe kind of a what-the-heck wide receiver 3 or a 4. I like Garçon a little bit more than I do Crowder, but Crowder is still getting his share of targets. Again, I mentioned they really like this rookie out of Duke, this Jamison Crowder. I think they like him. So for me, both guys, kind of what-the-heck wide receiver 3 or 4s if you're hurting it wide out and you need someone to throw out there, or the dart throw guy. maybe you take a shot on either Pierre Garcon or Jamison Crowder. But you play Kirk Cousins, you play Deshaun Jackson, you play Jordan Reed for sure. You still don't play a Washington running back, though, because, there's still nobody. There's still nobody that's emerged from the group. You can't trust Alfred Morris or Matt Jones or Chris Thompson. You can't trust any of those three at this point because there's just not one consistent option. So can't trust any of those guys. Miami at Philadelphia. Love the Eagles this week. They looked amazing against Dallas last week. And Miami, we've seen time and time again that the Miami defense has been very forgiving against top offenses. So I really like these guys. Sam Bradford for me is at the very least a high upside QB2 and very usable as a bye week filler. DeMarco Murray, start him, low end RB1, looking strong these past couple weeks. Ryan Matthews, for me, he has fantasy value as an RB3 or flex. He can occasionally kind of vulture a touchdown from DeMarco Murray, so he does have at least some fantasy value. So only if you're, I would recommend as more of as a flex play for sure than as an RB3. So just be aware of that. But, certainly still usable in that situation. And the only wide receiver you can trust is Jordan Matthews. But Jordan Matthews had a big week last week. He looks like he's starting to break out. For me, more of a low-end wide receiver 2 or 3, but I like him this week as well. So I like really at least your main 3 Eagles, Bradford, Murray, and Matthews. I think you can start in this matchup. For Miami, I think really, again, the only guy worth starting is Lamar Miller at running back. Miller has been a workhorse these past few weeks. He's actually been a decent fantasy option. The Eagles defense not exactly strong in most areas. So Miller for me, a low-end RB2. I'm not thrilled with Ryan Tannehill's prospects this week at quarterback. For me, he's more of a high-end QB3 or a desperate bye-week filler because he doesn't have a whole lot of weapons there in Miami to work with. All really has is Jarvis Landry right now. He's not getting Rashard Matthews involved. Devontae Parker still is dealing with a foot issue, and he's not coming around yet. Hasn't had the breakout game yet. So really the only Dolphin receiver you can trust is Jarvis Landry. And for me, he's, for the foreseeable future, more of a boomer bust wide receiver 2 or 3. So really, the only Dolphin I think is a really safe play this week is Lamar Miller. Cleveland at Pittsburgh. You start your Steelers this week. I mean, it's pretty much, and again, an easy matchup to exploit. Now, Big Ben has said that, he has not ruled himself out yet for this week with that foot sprain. But from what I have seen, you want to monitor that, obviously, but I think it's going to be another week where Big Ben's going to be out. So I would probably say Landry Jones is the guy that's probably going to get the start this week. But the safest place for the Steelers are D'Angelo Williams at running back and Antonio Brown at wide receiver. I think either of those guys you can start this week. Now D'Angelo Williams is dealing with a bit of a swollen foot issue, but he was back at practice today according to reports. He sat out Wednesday just to rest a little bit, so that's a good sign moving forward. So if I'm a D'Angelo Williams owner, so I'm hoping for another big week from him this week. So obviously he's an RB1 moving forward, and hope for another big week because Cleveland's run defense is terrible. I believe they're the worst in the league. So clearly great matchup here. And Antonio Brown, he is, affected by Big Ben's absence. But here's the thing. Landry Jones still finds a way to get him the football. So that's the big thing. Landry Jones is a good offense. And with Joe Hayden now, Brown is definitely a wide receiver 1. So start D'Angelo Williams. Start Antonio Brown. If you're hurting at quarterback, Landry Jones for me is a low-end QB2. I think he's certainly usable, because with the good matchup. So if you're in a pinch at quarterback, Landry Jones, somebody you can pick up off waivers, put him in this week, and see what happens. Obviously, you want to make sure that Big Ben is out for sure first, but it looks to me like Landry Jones is going to be the guy. And if you need help at quarterback, put him in there and see what happens. Obviously, I would prefer Kirk Cousins over Landry Jones, but if you can't get Kirk Cousins, and Landry Jones is a nice secondary option. So Martavis Bryant, for me, more of a wide receiver 3 because, Big Ben, I think, prefers Martavis Bryant a lot more than Landry Jones does. So for me, it's kind of a risky play. More of a wide receiver 3, at least a high-end wide receiver 3 when Landry Jones is the quarterback. And Heath Miller, actually I like Heath Miller as very much a low-end tight end 1 this week. Because, again, this is a plus matchup to exploit. And I think, he could be targeted in the red zone. So I like Heath Miller this week. The only Brown really I think you can trust this week, well, I say there's 2 you can trust this week. Duke Johnson at running back, who's becoming very, very usable in PPR leagues for sure. More of an RB3 or a flex, but definitely a strong flex play. Because he's not a workhorse back. That's really Isaiah Crowell's job at running back. But I can't really recommend him as a big play in standard leagues, not just yet. But if you have a flex position in, say, a standard league or in a PPR as an RB3, I think you can use him in those positions, but not really anything else. But he is starting to get a lot more work in the Browns offense. So really, Duke Johnson is the safest play this week for the Browns. But I think you can still use Gary Barnidge at tight end. I think he's still a low-end tight end 1. He is starting to become a tad touchdown dependent a little bit. There's some weeks where he's falling off because of the, I should say, roughness of the Browns offense. If that's even a word, roughness, I don't know. But just a little bit. But still, I think he's a good play for now. I'm not thrilled with Josh McCown this week. More of a desperate QB3. I can't recommend him as a bye-week filler. Even though Pittsburgh's defense is very forgiving and made Derek Carr look awesome last week, Josh McCown, to me, is just very inconsistent. He plays banged up. I don't like it. So for me, more of a desperate QB3. Don't play Isaiah Crowell. He's just bad. He's just one of the worst. He's like Trent Richardson. He's like one of the worst starting running backs in the NFL. And Trent Richardson was a Brown. I mean, come on now. Just very bad. I can't trust him. And Travis Benjamin is more of a what-the-heck wide receiver 3 or 4. He's only effective with Manziel at quarterback, in my opinion. So very, very risky play. Now, the fantasy game of the week, in my opinion, and I know this one might shock you, but trust me, I believe it when I say this, is Jacksonville at Baltimore. Yes, I know the records look bad, but you know what that means? 2 bad defenses. It was the same case with Oakland and Pittsburgh last week, and I see it again this week. It's going to be a lot of fantasy points in this game. So I like a lot of the guys in this matchup. I'd say any of the guys that you would probably start on these teams are must-start options. So the quarterbacks, Blake Bortles, Joe Flacco, yes, start these guys because they're going to put up big numbers. And Bortles especially has had, I don't know if it's a streak going on now or like 20-plus points in like several weeks this season, whether it be garbage time stats or whether it be actually competitive in games and winning some of them, I might add. Blake Bortles has actually looked really strong this year. So he's got 2 good weapons in Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns. He's getting TJ Yeldon involved in the passing game a little bit. So there clearly is upside. Julius Thomas, when he's healthy, getting him involved at tight end. So he's looked great. He's looked great in recent weeks. I feel that this is going to be a shootout game. Low-end QB1 for me for Bortles and a great bye-week filler. Flacco also is a low-end QB1, even though Flacco now is down to the likes of Kamar Aiken and Chris Gibbons at wide receiver. Someone's got to catch the ball, and Flacco's going to throw in this game. And Jacksonville's secondary is forgiving. So I think there's potential in this game for both guys to do very, very well. I like the running backs here. I like TJ Yeldon and Justin Forsett. And I like Forsett a little bit more than Yeldon because, Forsett to me has been more consistent over this season. But for me, he's a high-end RB1, and Yeldon definitely a high-end RB2 with RB1 upside. The Jaguars have also said they're going to give Yeldon more looks at the goal line because Toby Gerhart has been disappointing in goal line situations and Denard Robinson. So they're going to give Yeldon work at the goal line, which is huge for Yeldon's fantasy owners. So I like both guys this week as definite startable options as well. The wide receivers for Jacksonville, for me, are obvious must-start guys. Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns. Now, Allen Hurns is dealing with a bit of a foot injury, so you want to monitor that, see if he practices tomorrow. But Robinson, to me, is a must-start wide receiver. Allen Hurns is at least a low-end wide receiver 2 for me. Both guys, if they're healthy, they are go. They should be in your lineup. And wide receiver, for Baltimore, though, that's the only risky thing, though, for Baltimore. I can really only recommend Kamar Aiken right now as more of a desperate wide receiver 3 until he kind of separates himself from what's left of the Ravens receiving core with Steve Smith out for the year. with that torn Achilles. It really decimated that position. So for me, he's just a risky wide receiver 3 until he really emerges as that top option in Baltimore. Or it could be Chris Givens. We'll see what happens with him, who they got from the Rams. So we'll see what happens with that moving forward as well. And then Crockett Gilmore at tight end for me. Very much a sleeper tight end for me this week as well. But a low-end tight end 1 or 2. I like this matchup. That for me is the fantasy game of the week. Jacksonville at Baltimore. Don't laugh. I think... And don't laugh if Jacksonville wins, because I think they could go to Baltimore and win that game, because I think Jacksonville's got actually more talent up and down the roster than Baltimore does right now. Afternoon games, Minnesota is at Oakland for a 4:05 game. The Raiders, I think, now there's a little bit of a story to monitor with the Raiders. Amari Cooper did suffer a quad injury in practice yesterday, so that's obviously something to monitor this week. But all signs from what I've seen so far to him still being able to play. But you want to see what he practices tomorrow for sure if you own Amari Cooper. But for me, I think obviously even if Cooper doesn't go, I still think Derek Carr is a strong play this week. And Michael Crabtree obviously would get more targets if Carr is out, or if Cooper is out this week. But for me, if they're all full go, then I think you still play them. You know, the Vikings defense is going to provide Carr probably with the toughest test he's seen in a while. But so far he's passed everyone. He's been huge these past few weeks. I think you keep riding Derek Carr as a low-end QB1. I obviously have Derek Carr myself. I love how well he's done these past few weeks. So I'm going to keep rolling with Derek Carr as long as he's healthy and putting up these buku fantasy numbers. Obviously, again, I mentioned if Cooper and Crabtree are both healthy and they play, you put them out there as must-start wide receiving options. Now, the big question mark is Latavius Murray. He is still reportedly in concussion protocol, so his status for this week is very much in doubt. But if he goes, it's a very tough matchup with that Vikings defense, so he's more of a high-end RB2 if he plays. But you'll just want to monitor his practice work this week, see if he does get cleared by the NFL. Same with Teddy Bridgewater, the quarterback from Minnesota. He's also going through concussion protocol from that nasty hit he took in the Rams game last week. So you'll want to monitor his status this week as well. And the matchup, is a good one with the Oakland defense. But what's his role going to be this week? Are the Vikings going to go full bore and let Bridgewater throw? Are they going to go more with AP and be conservative? That's my concern with Teddy Bridgewater. So for me, he's again more of a low-end 2, high-end 3, depending on what the usage in the game flow is going to be for him this week. So, but just want to monitor his status and see if he does clear concussion protocol before wanting to put him in your lineup. But very, very risky for me this week. Again, the safest plays for me this week are Adrian Peterson, obviously, is matchup proof. So you want to start him, especially if Bridgewater is out. That will mean more touches for Adrian Peterson probably. So you'll want to definitely start him. And let's see, Raiders against tight ends this year. Oh yeah, they've been really bad. Okay, they've been very forgiving to the tight end position. So what does that mean? That means you start Kyle Rudolph. And normally you don't start Kyle Rudolph because Kyle Rudolph is either a bust or a very touchdown-dependent tight end. But the Raiders give up points to tight ends in bunches like bananas hanging on a tree somewhere, or hanging down to your local Kroger. So it's just... I know, that's kind of a weird comparison. We're looking at Kroger now, like, all these bananas. It is bananas. But, is bananas is how many touchdowns and points the Raiders give up to tight ends. So you start Kyle Rudolph this week. Great tight end 1 or bye week filler. New England and the Giants. This could be this could probably be fantasy game of the week 1C, because when these two get together, it's a fun game, because the Giants, we all know, have beaten New England twice in the Super Bowl. Tom Coughlin apparently just knows the magic potion to find a way to beat Bill Belichick and the Patriots. But the Patriots are going to play gung-ho and full bore in this matchup. So really, I like a lot of the guys. I pretty much like a lot of the skill players this week, except for Giants running backs. Again, this is a committee that is a mess. Outside of trusting Shane Vereen in PPR leagues, you cannot trust Rashad Jennings, you cannot trust Andre Williams, and you especially can't trust Orleans Darkwa. You can't, okay? You can't trust those guys. So, outside of using Vereen as an RB2 or flex in PPR, it's really the only Giants back you can trust. But for the Pats, you're starting Tom Brady, you're starting LeGarrette Blount, you're starting Julian Edelman, you're starting Gronk. Even though he had a dud week last week, it's probably one of the only weeks that Gronk has a dud week. You're starting him as normal. And really, Danny Amendola and Brandon LaFell, I think you can throw them out there as at least wide receiver 3s. They're kind of boomer bust with their usage, but you can put them in your lineup. You can play them in this matchup. So start your Patriots, and if you're hurting at flex, I think maybe you could take a flyer on James White just to see what happens with him, or Brandon Bolden, depending on their workload. They're probably going to split the workload for this matchup probably, but then again, we don't know until it happens, so it's a risk either way. But you could probably, if you're hurting at flex and you want to see what happens, take a shot on one of those guys. I prefer White to Bolden right now, but that could obviously change, so just keep that in mind going forward. Giants, you start Eli Manning, you start Odell Beckham, and you really put Ruben Randle out there, again, as more of a risky wide receiver 3, but if you're desperate, then you take a shot on Ruben Randle. Kansas City's at Denver this week. I think Denver's going to bounce back. Tough loss against the Colts last week, but they're playing at home again. Traditionally, Peyton Manning does do well against Kansas City. So I think this week, he's more right. I think this week more of a low-end QB1, but he's still a strong play. You still start his receivers. You still start Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas. There's top options there. You still start. So those 3 are the safest bets this week. And if you start any Denver running back, I think you still start Ronnie Hillman. I think right now he's still the one that you can trust a lot more than C.J. Anderson. I like Hillman as an RB2 with upside. Anderson more of an RB4 or flex in really deep leagues at this point until we see more from him. He's just been a huge fantasy bust this year. He's clearly been leapfrogged by Ronnie Hillman, and I think right now Hillman is the safer play. Now, Vernon Davis at tight end, until we actually see him show some life in the offense, I really can't rate him as anything more than a desperate tight end 2. You hope to see him get some work going forward. We'll see what happens. But for now, you really can't trust with anything more than a tight end 2, which is not a recommended start until we see some consistency from him. For the Chiefs, I really can't recommend any Chiefs this week as must-start options. Maybe Charkondrick West as a low-end RB2 or a flex, but again, a very tough defense here in Denver. Only if you're hurting at running back should you start Charkondrick West. He has done a nice job filling in for Jamal Charles. He's starting to get more rhythm going, but not a recommended play against the tough defense. I would not play Alex Smith this week. Again, not even recommended as a QB3 or a bye week filler. Look elsewhere. Now, Jeremy Maclin, to me, is more of a boomer bust wide receiver 3. Not having Aqib Talib, though. He is suspended for this game, though, because of the poke in the eye to Dwayne Allen. But, that kind of helps a bit. So take a chance only if you are desperate on Jeremy Maclin. And Travis Kelce, you probably can't afford to sit Travis Kelce this week, but really don't expect top production from him in this matchup. He's more of a high-end tight end 2 for this week only, though, instead of being his normal tight end 1 self. So really the only running back, the only Chief you can really trust if you're desperate is Charkondrick West. The Sunday night game, Arizona at Seattle, it's tough. It's really tough to trust anyone in this matchup because I expect a low-scoring, grind-out game, 2 very tough defenses here. For terms of the Cardinals, I would say probably the only one you can maybe trust as a high-end wide receiver 2 is Larry Fitzgerald, but Carson Palmer, tough to sit, but temporary expectations, more of a high-end QB2 for me. Chris Johnson is a very risky low-end RB2 or 3 play. If you don't have better options, just be aware. Just temper your outlook on him this week. I wouldn't play John Brown or Michael Floyd. Normally, they're very good wide receiver options, but very, very risky wide receiver 3 plays this week, only if you're desperate. For the Seahawks, you probably can't sit Marshawn Lynch or Jimmy Graham because, again, even though the matchup's tough, you normally throw these guys out there as your RB1 and tight end 1. So even though the matchup's tough, you probably can't afford to sit either of those guys. Russell Wilson for me is more of a high-end QB2 for this matchup, a very, very risky play at best. And I can't recommend any Seahawks wide receivers this week, not even Doug Baldwin, because, again, that secondary with Patrick Peterson and Tyrann Mathieu, just too tough. As for the Monday night game, Houston at Cincinnati, you start your Bengals. I mean, J.J. Watt can't stop them all by himself. We know this. I mean, the Bengals are play well at home. They're going to keep riding it. Start Andy Dalton. You hope that this is the week that Jeremy Hill breaks out and has a big week. You really hope, but he's been disappointing this year. For now, we'll rate him as a low-end RB2. Gio Bernard is a high-end RB2 with RB1 upside, though, for this matchup for me because, again, he's been more productive than Jeremy Hill. You start A.J. Green. You definitely start Tyler Eifert. And, again, if you're hurting it wide out for me, Marvin Jones, a usable wide receiver 3 with upside. For the Texans, the only one you could really trust is DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver. Brian Hoyer has low-end QB2 value, but only for garbage time stats at best. And I wouldn't recommend playing a running back, not even against the Bengals defense. Don't recommend Alfred Blue, not even as an RB3 this week. All right, guys. That is all I have for Week 10 for this week. Good luck this week. Go out there and get a win this week as well. Just keep going. As I've always said, there's always a chance for you to win weeks, so keep going. As always, guys, if you have any fantasy dilemmas or questions for your lineups, please hit up the comment box below or on the discussion page on my channel. I always check Gmail leading up to the matchups. Oh, I did want to point out one more thing, though. And excuse me for a second while I do this. And I hope that this is right. And if this is wrong, please forgive me. If someone can please edit, if this is wrong and edit it later, please do so. Please go to this website and sign the petition. FantasySportsForAll.com. It's either FantasySportsForAll.com or FantasyForAll.com. As I'm sure some of you are aware, the daily fantasy sites DraftKings and FanDuel were recently deemed illegal gambling by the state of New York. And clearly the two sites are going to fight that, probably in federal court. Now, even though I'm not big into daily fantasy and I only play in seasonal leagues, I have never felt that fantasy is in any way gambling. It is in some, they deem it that it is not a game of skill. It is actually more of a game of chance where we are placing bets on players. And I really don't see the merit in that. I don't think that's the case. These two sites, they advertise big time on ESPN and major networks. You see the ads all the time. Well, it might get annoying at times. They do make their case, to get daily fantasy. Daily fantasy is one of a growing. It clearly is growing. It is massive. There have been obviously some repercussions with those two sites because there was the one scandal where the employee got early information to data, and that was a big screw up there by that. But now they're clearly being attacked in this regard. That New York, that for this week and for the foreseeable future, New York residents will not get to play daily fantasy on DraftKings and FanDuel because of this ruling. And they've already been given cease and desist letters and been given 5 days to respond. And I'm sure they will respond within that 5-day time frame, and they will fight this. And I applaud them for that. So please, if you haven't already, go to this website. Again, it's either FantasySportsForAll.com or FantasyForAll.com. Fill out the petition. Keep these sites up and running. Keep them going. I don't agree with that. I don't see how it is illegal gambling. These have been going on illegally for years and years. Some people made the comparison, well, is poker gambling? And yet you allow poker in the casinos. Is that any different from daily fantasy? So it's a big thing right now. It's a big deal. So please please, 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 if you can, sign the petition. Keep DraftKings and FanDuel going in New York, because who knows if New York is a big powerhouse state. It is a central area for things, and I believe FanDuel is based there. If they can't even operate in the state of New York, and if that remains the case, imagine what it's going to do to the rest of the country. It then may spread to Nevada, and then spread to other states, and then daily fantasy could eventually be, killed off as we know it. So please sign the petition. Please spread the word. Tell your friends. Please tell your fellow fantasy players. Let them know that fantasy needs to, daily fantasy or in general needs to stick around. It needs to still be out there. They need to keep it going, because it is not, at least to my opinion, it is not gambling. It is more a game of luck and a game of chance than anything else, because you are predicting predicting players and matchups, and in that case you are kind of putting your money out there on it, but you're not really you're deciding what to do with your money, and you're taking the risk to pick those players, and you're basing it on that. But I don't think you're really getting to that level. So fill out the petition. I just had to make the plug for that, because I want those sites to stick around, because it is a big thing for the fantasy industry. We love this game. We love playing it. Whether you play for free or you play for money, fantasy sports need to stick around and should not be attacked like this from someone who clearly, to me, has no idea what fantasy revenue brings to the table. So just my 2 cents on that, or maybe more, literally. All right, so had to put that in there. Thank you again, and thank you as always for all you who tune in, all you who subscribe. I appreciate it as always. Go out there and get a win in Week 10, and we will see you again next week for the Week 11 edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report for your team, your league, your game, your home. Take care, God bless, and good luck.